now. So you'll see that we've started recording. Let's see. Lastly, we will be sending out a link to resources in the coming days or even later on today. And it will also have a survey attached to it. So please fill out the survey, and that helps make our programs better for you. So if there's anything that you really want to see, or you thought, yes, this worked, this didn't work, please let us know. So let's see. And I believe that the way that Woodland Wednesdays work is that we have to have a couple of jokes from Gail. So Gail from Geauga Soil and Water, would you like to regale us with a couple of jokes before we get started?
Oh, the pain, the pain. Thanks, Suzanne.
You're welcome.
Thanks everyone for being here. And I always try to make the jokes like content appropriate. So hopefully these aren't too bad. But so why were the estate planning documents non-binding? This is especially for Dave Marison. Why were the estate planning documents non-binding?
You got me, Gail.
There were too many heirs. Okay, painful. Number 2, how do many families feel about the process of timber harvesting their woods? Totally stumped. Well, if that's how you feel, tonight's gonna help you out. So thanks for tolerating my jokes, and back to you, Suzanne.
All right. Well, I can't follow that up very well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Mr. David Marison, and I will make him a host. He can now share his screen, and take it away, David.
Well, I can say that honestly, after those jokes, Gail, the night can only get better, right? So I have not heard those before, so good to hear. So I'm no stranger. This is like I'm coming back home, but I didn't have to jump in the car and drive all the way home, and just I'm thankful to be asked to speak this evening quickly on such a topic. But for some of you, it's like seeing some old friends. I see some old friends on the call tonight, so that's great to see. But I was, of course, born and raised in Ashtabula County. Grew up on a dairy farm that you can see there in the background, and was there as the county extension educator for close to 24 years before relocating down to Coshocton County. But just know that I get back home to check on mom, check on the farm every couple of weekends, just kind of slip into town. So it's great to be back on with a lot of my friends and former colleagues here from Northeast Ohio, moved to Coshocton County. So my job is to give you an overview, a really quick overview. This is the 30,000 really quick view, but to overview of farm planning, estate planning. As we talk about most of our farms here in the state of Ohio, of course, we just don't specifically talk about the farm, the acreage, corn, soybeans, hay grounds, but we also talk about the woodlands, because the woodlands are an important part of all of our farms across the state. Just as a reminder, this presentation is offered as an educational session. It's a half hour of what I have here tonight. It shouldn't be considered legal or tax advice. Of course, I would ask you to consult with your appropriate professionals, or if you have some follow-up questions, you can contact me later. So with that, just because it is such a short time here that we have tonight, can't definitely go completely. And we're
Hey, David,
and you're gonna
real quick before you get
can you
started.
mute those? Yep.
Yes, please mute. If you go down to the bottom of your screen, please mute your microphones. Thank you.
All right, that's what got us going. That gives me a chance to redo some of my screens so that I can see some folks. So just to know that this is a quick overview. So if you're really intrigued about this subject and you know that you would like to get more information, we have a perfect opportunity, especially since you're all Zoom capable as you're on tonight. We have a virtual 4-evening workshop on starting on January 31st, going February 7th, 21st, and 28th. That's a 4 Mondays, kind of skip Valentine's Day, so you can take your honey out for dinner that night, but it's 6:30 to 8 o'clock. And what we will do is go through the entire farm succession and estate plan. So if you feel like, man, I'm stumped, back to Gail's joke, right? I'm stumped about all this. Well, this is that introductory course to talk about that succession, how you talk to your family about what's going to happen, as well as give you some of the nuts and bolts and tools about estate planning. If you don't want to be on Zoom for 4 Monday evenings, you can jump in a car on February 25th and drive down to Wayne County, and that's an all-day workshop down in Wayne County. And of course, you could drive to Greene or Wood County as well, but as extension, we rotate those around the state. And if you want one of those workshops up there, just holler at your local extension educator and say, hey, how come you haven't had David do one of his regional programs up there? So invite you to do that. You can go to go.osu/farm succession for more information about that workshop, the virtual as well as the in-person one. So I'd invite you to that if that's something that you're interested in. I'm going to look at this in a couple phases here. First, on the farm succession side, farms transition planning or succession planning, depending on the speaker, you're going to hear those terms used interchangeably. But farm transition planning is a process by which you're transferring the ownership and the management of the family business. So that could be the farm, that could be your woodland management plan that you have developed, transferring that to the next generation. Basically, you're training them up to manage the resources which you currently are managing today. And then coupled with that, because these all play together, is farm estate planning. And that's basically your decisions on how you're going to transfer your assets that you've been given and that you have earned through your life. So that could be land, building, livestock, crops, investments, land, woodland, machinery, feed, life insurance, personal possessions, you name it. Upon your death, which all of us will die someday, how are those going to be distributed? Are they going to go to your spouse? If your spouse isn't there, will it go to your heirs? Who are your heirs, in fact? So that's farm succession plan, farm estate planning. I like to look at this as a three-legged stool because I can talk all day about transition plan and I can talk all day about estate planning. But there's that middle leg of the stool, I think, is the most critical when you get into these planning functions about how to transfer your assets to the next generation, and that is the family dynamics. Now, I'm old enough to know that if we're honest with ourselves, every family has some sort of dysfunctionality. And farm families especially, we're really dysfunctional in some ways. If your family is not dysfunctional, I would love to have a conversation with you, but I think every family has a little dysfunctionality to us, which means this transition planning, the estate planning, can have a little bumps in the road just because of the family dynamics that we have. We have a full plan. I'm going to see. Yes, I have the ability. So if I see anyone's thing come up, I'm just going to mute Suzanne. So just so you know, I can do that. So the
Yes, thank you.
the whole farm planning model is, and I just show, and we have a fact sheet that we have written on this for Ohio State that you can read more in depth. But the reason I show this to you is that our family history, a lot of moving parts when you talk about how do we transition and how do we transfer our estate to the next generation. These planning functions. So if we're in a business, we have a business plan that operates how we do the things that we do, what we raise, what we sell, what we grow. But then also you have these other planning functions that are all spinning around in the same kind of each spokes in the wheel. We have retirement planning that we should be thinking about. We have this transition plan that we should be thinking about, basically how we are grooming that next generation to take over. Then we have the estate plan. This is the one that we fear a lot because of all the legal jargon that's out there. And then we have our investment planning. But no, we can't talk about one without talking a little bit about all of the others because they all mesh together. For instance, if I'm a farm family and I want the next generation to take over the farm and maybe farm with me for a while, if I don't have adequate retirement income, if I have maybe not paid quite a bit into Social Security and I don't have those 401k accounts up to where they should be, that's going to mean if I'm going to step away and retire from the business, it probably means that the business is going to help with some of that retirement money that I need as the senior generation. And if that's the case, well, then that's money that the business doesn't have to reinvest back into itself. So all these functions work together. And of course, we as individuals and as a business, we got those left and right, as well as the family history that's there. Will kind of sometimes will drive what we have to do when we do the estate plan. So my first question, and this is what your service forester or your consulting forester is going to talk to you about anyways when you do your management plan for your woodlands, about what is your goal for the farm? What is your goal for the woodlands? I would ask you the same question. What is your goal for your woodlands, for your farm, for 10, for 20, for 30, for 40 years down the road? If you had to look back, and I think the way that I would phrase this to people is, as you make your decisions and your goals, one of the things that you need to think about is who is going to be the best steward of the resources that you were entrusted with during your lifetime. And then how do you make sure those resources are put into the hands of an heir? And when I say heir, that doesn't have to mean your son, your daughter, or blood relative. There could be a lot of other heirs that might show up in the picture as you develop your plan. But bottom line, who is going to be the best caretaker of those resources which you have been managing during your lifetime? So that's a good conversation starter for your family. And then that will roll you into your estate plan. And I'm going to, usually when I talk about this subject, I flip it transition planning first and then go to estate planning. Tonight, I flipped that around a little bit and concentrated a little more on the estate side. So what's the legal side of farm transition planning? Well, there's a lot of things that go into this. Again, this is an 8-hour course that I'm talking about here. But just know anything that you decide to do with your estate, there are mechanisms to accomplish the goals that you want. So your main objective is to know what you want, and then your attorneys and then the other professionals that are helping you can help you craft a plan that will get you from point A to point B. That could include, of course, we all need advanced directives. Powers attorneys could, the transfer of death, wills, trusts, LLCs, you name it. A lot of different things could come into play. So first question to answer is, who are your heirs? So you would make a list. Logically, the state of Ohio, if you don't define who your heirs are, the state of Ohio will do that for you. For instance, for myself, my heirs are my children and my spouse. And then, of course, other heirs could be my sisters. It could be my brother from another mother. A best friend, that could be one of my heirs. My church could be an heir of mine. The Western Reserve Land Conservancy could be an heir of mine. So when you start looking at an heir is basically, you would write down on a piece of paper, who are the people that I want to entrust with the assets that I have, basically, and that could be anybody. So when you approach an attorney, you start asking and talking with an attorney. I'm just going to give you some questions for you to think about. And Suzanne, I believe that these slides are available. So if you want the slides, Suzanne can send these to you, but so you can go back and answer these questions as a family. And one of the first things that attorney is going to ask is, do you have a federal estate tax issue? Do your assets, the value of those assets, do they put you in a place where you're going to have to pay federal estate tax? Here in Ohio, we don't have the Ohio estate tax now. That was eliminated a few years back. So that's not a concern unless our Ohio legislature brings that back. They're going to want to know what the financial situation of the operation of the family is. Basically, you're going to need a balance sheet. What are your assets? We have this farm assets. So that could be the land. It could be the woodlands. And then we got a non-farm assets. So that could be a lot of other things like IRAs. It could be life insurance policies. It could be savings bonds. You name it, we would put all those together. Are there any special needs that need to be addressed? All of our families have some hurts and hangups and some hazards that we need to be thinking about during a estate plan. When I think about special needs, maybe there's a child that has special needs that we need to take care of. Maybe one of my sons or my daughters or heirs has a hang up that if I give them an incredible estate, that may become an issue that harms them more than helps them. And what places, they're going to ask you what pieces do you already have in place. And then from there, they're going to look about, okay, maybe what needs to be changed. So as you go into your attorney, they're going to want a balance sheet. So basically you can save yourself money. When I did my estate a few years ago, I inquired my attorney. I said, okay, how much money did I just save myself because I brought this all to you and then you didn't have to do all this work? And he said, I saved close to $3,000 for just the work that I did on my backside before I took it to them. But they're going to want to know, they're going to want to look at a balance sheet, looking at your personal farm assets and debts, everything that you own. So you're going to need to make a list of the accounts and how they're titled. So you have this land, you have this woodlands that you're all on here tonight for. How is that titled? When I look at the deed of that land, how is it titled? Is it joint rights of survivorship to the next generation? Is it transferable on death to someone? They want to see that. They want to see your life insurance policies. Who are the TODs or PODs? Are they transferable on death, payable on death, designations already on those accounts that you have? And of course, they're going to want to know your list of your heirs, the relationship, birthdays, addresses, any business entity that you own and your ownership in there. And then what you already have in place. So wills and power of, yeah, and some of you don't have any wills and powers attorney, etc. And then list of your advisors. So here's one thing that saw this as a need years ago when I started doing this teaching about, you can save yourself money if you pull all these documentations together. And there's a document called Getting Your Farm and Family Affairs in Order that I worked with a couple attorneys on to develop. And what this allows you to do, if you go page by page through this document, you can build a notebook of this asset portfolio that you own. And then when you go to speak to your attorney, you can take this notebook and you can slide it across the table. And instead of paying a paralegal or someone from the attorney's office to go to the courthouse and pull a copy of the deed of the land that you own, you save that time because you already have a copy of that and you can give it right to the attorney. So if you want that, I'll show you a link of how you can get that. And then, of course, as we go through our Planning for the Future Farm workshop, we actually will give you these task lists for you to do. So you can see a quick task list there about a balance sheet. Yes, I need to have a balance sheet to go in there. I need to show how all the assets and accounts are titled, who my heirs are, and you go right down, check them off. Yep, I have those. And then you write down the goals that you have, and then you can take those goals and share those with the attorney. I don't know about you, but sometimes I can be intimidated by some professionals, especially an attorney. And then I get into the meeting room and I'm like, oh, I want to talk about this. And then halfway through the meeting, I've forgotten everything that I wanted to talk about. Well, you can help prevent yourself from doing that by having things written on a piece of paper and going in there and going right down your list. Remember, when you're dealing with some professionals, time is money and money is time. So when you're on there, you're on the clock. So you want to make sure your thoughts are well organized and you're ready to have a real quick, good, healthy discussion with them. Now, one of the first questions we ask is, well, man, I just don't want to pay. Man, am I going to have to pay federal estate tax? Because I just don't want to do that. I don't want to pay the government any money. Well, let's look at where we are. And we look at our net worth. And then right now, currently, if you were to pass away today, as a person, $11.7 million is your estate can be $11.7 million and less. And that can be then transferred to your heirs free and clear of paying any estate tax. If I'm a married couple, I would double that. And that goes to 23.4 million, excuse me. So I don't know if there's anybody here on the call, but if you're as a married couple over $23.4 million and you need to adopt a new son, I'm available for adoption. But just know in today's terms, as we look at estate in our state tax, if your estate is under 11.7 or 23.4 as a couple, then you're not going to have to pay any federal estate tax because of the federal rate, and then we don't have the Ohio estate tax. So in that portability rule exists. So when I pass away, that can transfer to my spouse. that dollar figure can go forward. Of course, I know what some of you are thinking. Well, Congress has been talking about making adjustments. Well, if you go back to the year 2010, the federal estate tax was $1 million, or 2009 actually, it was $1 million per person. 2010, it went unlimited. And then since that time, we have gradually increased this to where we're at that $11.7 million. And that's a little increase here for 2022. We understand, based on this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, that this estate tax was going to roll in that 11 million per person for a while. But notice on the year 2026 what happens. That goes back to $5 million. In fact, there was discussion in this latest round of negotiations in Congress to drop back to that $5 million around now. So my advice to you is plan as if it's going to be at the lowest possible exemption. There was discussion of dropping it back to $3.5 million per person. What I would do is plan. I would plan at $5 million per person, what it's going to be in 2026. And then you are carefully watching what happens in Washington, D.C. and making adjustments as you go. Just remember, just because you write your trust and your will and the other things that you might do on estate planning, doesn't mean you can't go and change that. You know, I wrote mine 6 years ago, and just a few months ago, I made some updates and updated mine based on current conditions. So your attorney, when you meet, there's lots of pieces that are going to pull into your plan. And ultimately, what is good for me may not be good for your family. So this is all going to be done on a case-by-case basis on what your family's goals are, what kind of assets you have. But no, there's a whole laundry list of things there that attorneys and professionals can use to help make sure that your estate plan meets the goals that you have. One thing that we throw out there, and one thing that we discuss in our workshops is, should heirs be treated equally in an unequal situation? And one of the things, especially with farm estate planning, we discuss is, for instance, here's Bob with he has 6 brothers and sisters, a $2.1 million estate. Bob's the sole child that is farming on that farm. But if mom and dad were to split that farm that Robert's been on, equally, they would each get $300,000 a piece. Now, if the goal was for that farm to continue in the future, then the family has to have that discussion is, if I have to buy my brother and sisters out of $1.8 million, do we have the equity in the business to do that? If not, does the estate plan have to reflect differently where Robert gets a bigger portion of the pie? Just understand that the word equal does not always equal the word fair. So a conversation to have. And there's the book that I talked about, Getting Your Affairs in Order. There's a picture right there of my book. If you were to go down into my secret hiding place downstairs, you would be able to pull this notebook out, and inside of it has everything to settle my estate as it is today. So it has everything. You can see it has my titles to my vehicles. It has all the property information of the farm that I still have up there in Ashtabula County, as well as all my financial statements for my different accounts. It's right there. When something happens to me, Emily will be able to walk in, grab the notebook, and away she goes. The best gift that you can give your heirs is have everything in order like this. So if you want to get a copy of this PDF writable document, which is about 30 pages long, just drop me an email. I'd be happy to send it to you. That way, if I have your email, we're making revisions to this document. And then as we make revisions, we can send you an updated. The hardest part is doing this once. And then all you have to do at tax time every year is to update it. So I would encourage you to do that. You can take a look through it if you request that, and I'll be able to send that to you. Now, just a few items on succession issues. There's a lot of items which can derail your intentions about what you want to happen to your estate. And that could start with poor family communications. And if there's anything that I work the most with farm families with, it's about their communication skills and the communication between maybe husband and wife, maybe between mom and dad and their children, Maybe it's between the children. So family communications by far is the #1 issue that we have when we're going through this estate plan, because most of the time, most of our families don't know how to have conversations about things that are difficult to talk about. And surely death is not the easiest thing to talk about, but other things that can derail your intentions. You can put a great estate plan together and have it all laid out for the kids, but then you die out of turn. And when I say die out of turn, that means maybe your son or daughter who you thought would be the sole heir to that estate that you have. What happens if they pass before you? And that does happen. It's happened in my family. When you die out of turn, how does that affect what you have planned? Of course, disability can impact it. We know that marriages, we have a 50% success rate here in the state of Ohio with marriages. So how will divorce and second marriages impact us? I think about not only someone who myself was widowed at a young age, but you think about the senior generation when they're widowed, and what will happen if there is a remarriage, and what kind of conversations and what kind of protections do you have in place for those marriages that may appear 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Of course, long-term care, we understand and can appreciate that we all might end up in a nursing home. The average stay in a nursing home is well over 3 years, and that's a significant cost. My question would be to you, if it was on average, that means if you had to go into a nursing home, on average, that your family might have to come up with an expense of around $250,000 based on the average stay in a nursing home. Would they have to sell the Woodlands that you own to be able to finance a long-term care stay? So again, another conversation to throw in there about what happens with long-term care issues. What happens, I don't have adequate retirement accounts and I have to sell part of the farm because I need money for my retirement. And then also, what if I have to buy out a business partner? They want to liquidate, they want to sell their 50% share of the woods that we have. Are you able to do that? Is there a mechanism for that to happen? What happens if you get snarled into an unexpected lawsuit? So just some things that could happen. 3 years ago, we never talked about global issues that could impact estate plans or succession plans. But I think the coronavirus has proven that we can never count out anything when it comes to a global issue or a pandemic that could occur. The last thing that we want you to have to be is to be on that train that you see in the picture and where it's headed, right? So we always challenge you to think about the what if situations. What if this happened? Does our plan cover that? What if this happens? What would we do? So how would you pivot based on different things that might happen? I know we don't like to think about negative things, but estate planning is a great time to think about, let's think of all the negative things and let's figure a way that we can overcome them in our planning. And then also I would challenge you, I see some of you are the senior managers of your operation, whether that's a farm or woodland. I would encourage you to have that conversation with your heirs about, if I'm going to entrust you with this asset in the future and you had to take over management, what would you be the most concerned about? Some of you have been lone rangers when it comes to be managing your woodlands, right, in your farm. And we haven't transferred the knowledge that we have up here to the next generation. Have you asked them what they need to know to be able to manage that? And then what do they need to know and how can you help them out? And I put a picture of this January calendar up there, right? Just as a reminder that, hey, senior generation, it's our responsibility to train the next generation to manage that woodlands, that farm that we have. So think about this in baby chunks. There's 365 days in the year. All you simply need to do is transfer one piece of knowledge every day. And if that was your goal for the year for 2022, if we came together a year from now, your son, your daughter, your heir, whoever that may be, would then have 365 new tools in their toolbox to better manage that resource that you're leaving them. And that could be anything, right? That could be our woodlands. It could be the farm. It could be the personal possessions that we have in our house. How are you going to entrust them? How are you going to train them up
for that. So that I put on the senior generation. Junior generation, if you're having these conversations, I would be asking a lot of questions. Open that communication up so you can talk about that management transfer. So I guess my question to you is passing on your woodland to the next generation. If that's your goal, if that's why you're on here tonight and that's your goal, when's a good time to start this conversation with your family? Well, I asked that knowing that I think the answer is not tonight. The answer is that conversation should have happened a day, a week, a year ago, right? So now's the time to get on and start having some of these conversations. Just to give you a quick sample of what I would encourage you to do, attend some extension events. This event that kind of like the webinar series that I was talking about, this event that's put on with this great partnership up there, attend events like this, develop your goals, think about a plan of how you can strategically transfer the knowledge of what you own and your goals to the next generation. And then sit down, make sure you've written the will, make sure you've updated those. You don't write those documents and then hope that 30 years later from now that they're still good. You want to write them, you want to execute them, you want to have them. And every couple of years, you dust that notebook off, you pull it back on the table, you have a family meeting, and you go through those documents to make sure that everything is okay. And I'd encourage you to do that, getting your affairs in order booklet that I showed you, and then start having some family meetings to talk about transition, start talking about estate planning, and then you can kind of craft your direction for your farm and your woodland for the future. Now, just from personal experience, I can say the worst thing that you can do is leave the burden of making decisions to the surviving spouse or the next generation. Because at a time of death, you will not think the same, nor will you operate the same that you normally would, because you're grieving that loss of your spouse or the loved one. So don't leave those burdens for those decisions. Have those conversations now between the family of what your expectations and goals are for your estate plan. And I just put these 3 quotes, and there's my dad. So some of you know my dad or knew my dad. But these are just kind of some thoughts I share each time I give one of these presentations. Procrastination is not avoiding a task. It's also avoiding the emotions of the company, an uncomfortable task. The measure of one's character is not what they get from the ancestors, but what they leave their descendants. And I still find the days too short for all the thoughts I want to think, all the thoughts I want to think, all the walks I want to take, all the books I want to read, and all the friends I want to see. These are pretty powerful just reminders to me, because when my mom went to get my dad's suit jacket to take the funeral home when my dad passed away, these 3 quotes were tucked in the suit jacket in his handwriting from his last school board meeting up there in Ashtabula County. So I think it was just my dad's reminder to myself, but also my reminder that I can share with you that, yeah, estate planning is not easy. Thinking about succession planning, thinking about our death is not easy. It's uncomfortable, in fact. However, the things that you do today can really be so impactful for the future generations that follow you. So we talk about legacy of our woodlands, legacy of our farm. The best legacy that you can give to your heirs is to have these thoughtful discussions about what's going to happen to just to the assets that you own, and to put them in a place where they can be really successful going forward. So with that, Suzanne, here's my information for those. Since I have moved south, and I will report that there is snow down here today. I heard there's some snow up there. But since I moved south, you can get a hold of me at the Coshocton County Extension Office. There's my email. That has not changed since I've been with Extension, but also there's my phone number. If you have any other questions, I'm going to be on the entire time, Suzanne, so I'll be able to answer any chat box questions that they're going to be too as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. That was the stuff about your dad's very touching. And you're right. There's such tough discussions to have, but so important. So I hope you guys garnished a lot off of that. And next we've got Brett Rodstrom. Brett, I'm going to go ahead and let's see. Can you share your screen if I don't make you a host, Brett?
We'll see. How's that look?
That looks good.
Okay. All right. So thank you. Dave, that was fantastic presentation. And just to kind of echo what he finished with, I meet with landowners every month that I find myself sitting at a kitchen table, and it's 4 siblings. Mom and dad finally died, 4 adult siblings. Mom and dad have finally died, and there was no estate plan. And one of them's been farming the farm for 20 years, and one of them lives in Texas, and one of them's a teacher, and the other one wants to sell the property to a developer and get as much money as possible. And they are tearing themselves apart, trying to figure out how to make this transition. And it's really sad because a lot of times they never talk again. A lot of times they, because this gift wasn't given to them by the generation above them of having an estate plan, having these decisions already made. And that sometimes includes land protection, sometimes it doesn't, but it really is important to do this for your heirs so that they're not fighting over the farm. They're fighting over the old rocking chair or the cabinet or something else that is important. Let them fight over that, but don't let them fight over the farm. Have those decisions made, include them in that process ahead of time, so that they're aware of what's coming. Because at the time that this all happens, you know, they all have different opinions, they all have different financial resources, and they're all grieving in some way or another, and it just compounds the entire issue. So great advice there from Dave. So as we transition here, again, I'm Brett Rodstrom. I'm the Vice President of Eastern Field Operations for the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. I'll just talk about the Land Conservancy a little bit. I don't think my presentation is going to be quite as long as Dave's, but still, we want to talk about tonight conservation easements and how easements work with forestry, specifically with forestry. So our mission at the Conservancy is to provide people of our region with essential natural assets through land conservation and restoration. Our work really kind of falls into 4 buckets. At the 10,000 foot level, we work to protect natural areas. There are areas in all over Northeast Ohio. We have unbelievable streams and wetland resources. We have unbelievable forest resources. There are some of the greatest floodplain areas and best farm soils in the region. We also have our built environment. Part of our urban areas are areas that often get overlooked in terms of our work, but we have a huge component of our staff dedicated to urban revitalization. And this isn't just Cleveland, it's Ashtabula City, it's Youngstown, it's Warren. All over the state, actually, we're working to turn the thing that you see in the bottom left corner there into something better, whether it's a new house or maybe it's back to open space in those urban areas to provide those assets. Agricultural protection, as I touched on, is a big component of our work. And we'll talk about some of those numbers here in a second, but most of the land in Ohio is owned by folks that are farming or have farmed, or it is farmland. And, that's in transition. Columbus is exploding. Cleveland is still expanding and eating up farmland. There's places that even now I remember that were farmland when I was a kid, and I'm not that old here, that are gone. I'm told that places like Mentor and in Lake County was at one time the onion capital and rose capital of the world. Now it's the cul-de-sac and dollar store capital of the world. And those are land use changes that have happened. And sometimes those land use changes weren't intended, but still had to happen because of the economics of the situation. And we can talk about that in a minute too. The other thing that we do is restoration work. Stream and wetland restoration. We do reforesting areas, both urban and natural areas. We work on pollinator habitat restoration, old field management, and woodland management as well. So there is a lot that we do. For the purpose of tonight, we're probably going to focus on conservation easements, but just understand that we have a pretty big scope of work. Our project area, our region that we work in, it's from Ottawa County over there, Lake Erie Islands, all the way over to Conneaut and down to Steubenville in Jefferson County. It's about 20 county project area. We do work outside that area from time to time upon request. We're getting more requests for places like Coshocton County to come and do work on conservation easements and also acquisitions. But this is really the gist of our area. Our central office is located, our headquarters is in Moreland Hills, Ohio, which is just outside of Chagrin Falls in Cuyahoga County. We have a couple field offices in the region, one in Oberlin College, one down in Summit County. And then a lot of us, as the pandemic has come through, are working from home still and still kind of commuting back and forth to the office on a sparingly basis. But we're still working well, and we're still moving forward with a lot of projects. We have a staff of about 40. We have a board of about 25 to 30 that fluctuates from time to time, and we have all different focus areas on what we do specifically. We have folks that are legal attorneys that are on staff. We have people like me that are looking and developing the next projects that we work on. There's a stewardship staff team that go out and monitor the properties that we have. We have staff grant writers. We have folks that are working on the urban projects and our urban revitalization program. So we're a pretty well-rounded, very diverse group of folks that are working in all aspects of Northeast Ohio to try to figure out how we can make things better and make things more sustainable for the future. This map represents our service area. The green areas that you see on the map are areas that are we consider parks and managed areas. So you're talking about Cuyahoga Valley National Park and ODNR Division of Wildlife areas, Akron watershed areas, Ravenna Arsenal is on here, for instance, and all the metro parks that are in the mix. So this is kind of the base map that we work off of and then work to try to connect some of these things. You can see around Cuyahoga County, the Emerald Necklace is actually green on this. And that is the Cleveland Metro Parks nationally recognized premier park system that really encompasses all of a ring around Cuyahoga County. So our success to date, and usually I save this for the last slide, but since we're talking about forestry tonight, I'll skip through this pretty quick, but we've created 193 public parks. We've created 15,000 acres, more than 15,000 acres of publicly accessible land within those public parks. So these are publicly accessible lands that went to different park districts, sometimes Division of Wildlife, sometimes townships, sometimes county parks. You know, these are areas that are publicly accessible, and that's just a portion of what we do. We've protected 290 private working farms. That represents almost 35,000 acres. That will be well over 35,000 acres by the end of the year. We permanently conserved 846 total properties in Northeast Ohio, and permanently protected almost 68,000 acres now. I think these numbers are correct as of the end of last year. So getting pretty close to 68,000 acres of permanently protected land in Northeast Ohio. Ashtabula County has 10,000 acres. Trumbull County has 10,000 or 11,000 acres. Geauga County is in that, getting pretty close to 10,000 acres. Trumbull County or Portage County has 3,500 acres. So gives you an idea of how these look, and how that shakes out is like this. So everywhere there's a dot on this map, there's a protected property that we've worked on. Our roots of the organization come from really a collection of smaller land trusts that have come together. Grand River Partners is one that I came from, but there was the Chagrin River Land Conservancy and Little Beaver Creek Land Conservancy, and one in Bracknell and Firelands. And so all these land trusts over the last 10 years or so, 15 years, I guess at this point, have merged together, 12 in total, to create what's now the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, which is a private nonprofit organization that's working in this region to supplement land protection that isn't always public access. It's really focused on private land protection as well. So how do we do that? There are a lot of different ways that we do that, but really everything falls into 3 or 4 different categories. Conservation easements, many of you heard of conservation easements, and we'll talk about those in a second. But conservation easements are really our bread and butter, in addition to agricultural easements. They vary, they're a little different. Conservation easements are really focused on natural areas, but often include agricultural components. As you all know, most properties aren't usually pristine forest, and a lot of times they're not all just cornfields either. So there's each property is different, and each easement is customized to fit that property. We talked about the creation of public parks. We do that as part of our work. That is something that is usually by request. The local park district come to us and say, hey, listen, we want to add this acreage to our park. Can you guys go out, figure out how to buy the property, get it under contract, go out and fundraise. We usually write state and federal grants to do that. We acquire the property. It usually gets protected with a park easement, which is very similar to a conservation easement, and then sent over to the park district, and they get the property usually for pennies on the dollar. And then that's added to the park's portfolio of public access areas. We also have a conservation buyer program. We're getting into this a lot more. Folks call us all the time and they say, listen, it's time for us to sell our property. We have 50 acres in Geauga County, but we don't want to see it developed. Would you guys be willing to find a buyer for us that is interested in protecting it? And so we effectively play matchmaker in that process of either buying or selling, or finding folks that want to have a property protected and folks that want to protect the property, putting them together and getting that 50 acres protected in that way. And it's a lot more complicated than that, but generally that's how that works. So really, these are the 4 ways that we're operating right now. And I say that in addition to our urban program, which has a reforestation component, it has a land bank component where we're tearing down vacant houses in urban areas. And then it also has kind of an urban parks component where we're putting in pocket parks and connecting those with bike paths and things like that, so that we can connect to the outer ring suburb parks. So that's how we're working. Easements are really what we wanted to talk about tonight, and what I was asked to talk about tonight. So I'm going to jump into that. So easements, conservation easements, agricultural easements, passive park easements, hybrid easements, which is, again, some combination of those. These are all voluntary agreements between the landowner and Western Reserve Land Conservancy. Every time we do one of these, it's voluntary. This isn't something we're forcing on anybody. These are folks that call us. I get 10 calls a week now. Landowners want to do this. Some of them are very interested in doing it for conservation. Some of them are very interested in doing it for agricultural protection. Some of them are very interested in doing it just for the tax deductions that come with it, and it's part of a financial process that they're working through with their estate and their family. The easements that we work on are permanent. The conservation easement is a legal document that goes on the deed. The easement itself will restrict some of the rights of the property in perpetuity. They limit most, but not all, development on the property. The Land Conservancy and the stewardship team that's headed by Pete McDonald monitor these easements every year. There's do's and don'ts that come with these easements, and the stewardship team goes out every year. They walk each property, they meet with the landowner, they build great relationships with the landowners, and they walk the property and make sure they didn't either intentionally or unintentionally violate the terms of that easement. They didn't, put a Walmart up back there accidentally or something like that. So, and then they come back next year. The idea with these easements is that it's really seamless. You don't really feel the impact of the restrictions that are on the property, and it also provides that service, which is what the Land Conservancy does, provides that service of helping to permanently protect any property in perpetuity. Most of the time, these easements are donated. 10 years ago, I'd say that there was a good chunk of easements that were purchased when there was funds available to do that. There's less and less funds to purchase these easements anymore. So most landowners now are opting to donate their conservation easement, which they in turn get a federal income tax deduction for. Farmers get 100% federal income tax deduction for the value of the easement. And the easement's value is determined by an appraiser. Non-farmer landowners get a 50% federal income tax deduction for the value of the easement. And those tax deductions can be spread out over 15 years. And so landowners are doing this. Some farmers, especially farmers down in Kinsman, Gustavus area, they've done 4,000 acres each. of several different farms. They're working it into their business model. The tax deduction is that good that they're working it into the business model. They buy a new farm, they put an easement on it, they take those deductions, save that money. Nobody wants to pay federal taxes. They're doing that and putting that into the purchase of the next property, which they then protect. So lots of things have happened in that Kinsman Gustavus area. I think we're over 11,000 total acres in the Pomatuming Valley there, the farmland that's been protected now. So that's really a protected farmland community down there. And we're starting to see that happen in Huron County as well and other pockets of our region. Typically easements are 20 acres or greater. That's kind of a soft rule that we work through. In past, we did easements all the way down to 2 or 3 acres, but we really had to, because of the demand, bump up that acreage minimum to around 20 acres. There are exceptions to that, but most of the time those easements are 20 acres or greater. And again, there's substantial income tax deductions that come with that. Sometimes there's property tax benefits, and often, depending on the estate tax level, and that, as David talked about, that bounces around. There's ways to use the conservation easement to devalue from an appraisal standpoint the farm or the property or the woodland, so that you avoid your total estate is underneath that estate tax level. So at the time of the transition, it's not caught into that estate tax burden. So you can avoid. We've had several landowners that have done easements at the time of death or near the time of death, so they've dropped their value of their total assets below that minimum to avoid millions and millions of dollars of federal estate taxes. So again, we always work with attorneys, and we want to work with your attorneys and your estate planners and your accountants to figure out the best way to maximize this. We have staff attorneys to do that, to work through these best angles. We want you to not only protect your property, we're very passionate about that, but we also want to make sure that you're doing it in the most economically efficient way to do that. So I just want to talk about some common easement myths. These are things that our staff and I hear about all the time. We hear the rumors that go around about conservation easements and how they work and how they don't. The first thing is that people talk about WRLC, the Land Conservancy. When you do an easement, they own your property. That's entirely not true. We don't own the property. In fact, the idea of property ownership is best represented. I've got some sticks here as this bundle of sticks. So if you think about all the rights you have in your property, you have the right to sell it. You have the right to farm it. You have the right to develop it. You have the right to hunt on it. You have the right to prohibit anybody else to come on the property. This is your bundle of sticks, and this is how property rights work. So when you put an easement on your property, it's not like you're giving us these rights. That's a common misconception. What happens is that these rights are extinguished. We don't own the rights, the development rights in your property. The development rights get extinguished on your property to the degree that you decide they want them to be. You can decide whether or not you want farming or not. You can decide whether or not you want the timber or not. You can decide if you want to have an oil and gas lease or not. These things can be paired together. You can have oil and gas leases and agriculture and timbering, and you can even reserve, development rights, some development rights on the property, and still have a conservation easement and still get that tax deduction. So that's one of the biggest myths that's out there about how this all happens. We don't own the property. We don't control the property. We just help you extinguish some of the rights that are in favor of conservation or future agricultural use. Conservation easements with the Western Reserve Land Conservancy, we're a private nonprofit organization, do not allow public access. Because you put an easement on the property does not mean that it's open to the public. It's still private property. In fact, we can't even come on it. We're allowed to do an inspection once a year to make sure you didn't violate those easements. We come out and do that, but we give you a couple weeks heads up on that. We want to walk the property with you, but we can't just show up and be there anytime we want at your 4th of July picnic or something like that. It's not about that. It is conservation. It's designed to be conservation for the private landowner, because really everything that needs to be conserved can't be public access and can't be done by the government. And that's why we were born as a land trust and a private nonprofit organization. No hunting's another one. We encourage hunting on properties. In fact, it's a critical tool used for, especially with deer, management of the property. We will not put no hunting into any of the easements at all by design, even if you ask us. So we won't do that. Oil and gas is certainly Not prohibited. Oil and gas leases are on almost every conservation easement that we do in some form. We have to look at the title to make sure those leases work with the conservation easement. A lot of the leases that are in place get grandfathered in. New leases have some restrictions that happen, but typically those oil and gas leases will stay with the landowner, and 100% of the time, those oil and gas leases, their signing bonus, the royalty checks, they all go to the landowner too. We have no say in that. We don't get any of those things as well. So we can set it up so that all those things can happen together. Farming is not prohibited at all. Most of our easements have farmland. Home sites, we actually encourage at least one home site on every property. You have the option to not put a home or reserve a home site if there isn't one there already, if you'd like, but we typically encourage at least one home site in each easement. And timbering, why we're here to talk about tonight, is certainly not prohibited. The landowner has the choice to decide if they want to have properties timbered or not. And there's a way to do that if it's going to be timbered. I get a lot of landowners that call me every month and say, listen, this is the property that my great-grandfather didn't timber, and my grandfather didn't timber, and my dad didn't timber. I want to make sure that it's not timbered. You have the ability to do that too if you want, but again, it's your choice to decide if you want timbering rights and reservations on the property, or if you want to restrict that. And in some cases, parts of the property get restricted and parts of the property are available for timbering. So it's not an all or nothing situation. It's really, every easement is customized by the landowner and what they want. And we work with you to understand what is the perfect fit. Not one easement that we have is the same as another easement. They are all different and they're all customized to exactly what a landowner wants. So we talk about forestry and forestry management. There's all kinds of different types of forestry management that's out there. There's commercial timber sales. That's probably the most common by far. There are many landowners that view timber as an asset, and rightly so, on the property. They are sustainably harvesting timber. They are working through good timber management plans, and they're working on 20 and 30-year cycles to cut trees, sometimes more often, depending on how they're doing it. And they're generating revenue for their family from timbering. We aren't trying to get in the way of that. That is a landowner's choice if they want to do that, and we can certainly work that into a plan. You can manage for species-specific wildlife. Sometimes timber management plans call for clear cuts. 5-acre clear cut in a woodland that's specifically dedicated for grouse and woodcock habitat, let's say, for instance. Sometimes landowners want to have a management plan that is about keeping dead standing trees in the woods for habitat for wildlife. That's part of a timber management plan that can be put together. People are managing timber for maple sugar, obviously. They want to maximize sugar maples in their forest and get rid of other trees, and that's what they're doing. Scenic views and fall colors. I saw a timber management plan one time that American Tree Farm program plan that was put together for scenic views, where they left aspens and sweet gums at the edge of a field so that they would have beautiful fall colors. And that was the whole point of their plan. You can manage for old growth forest. That's more of a no-touch management plan, or you can manage for young successional forests, where you're cutting in brush hogging almost every 3 to 10 years, and keeping high pole density areas on the edge of a field or in the middle of the forest. So again, these are all things that can happen. A lot of people are managing for hunting. They want deer, turkey, and squirrel. They're cutting away trees that are less desirable, managing for mass crop trees. And then there's the folks that are managing for invasive species. They're getting rid of invasive plants. They're getting rid of buckthorn. They're getting rid of, in our southern regions, they're managing for a tree of heaven, which is an invasive tree that hopefully doesn't get up here, but eventually probably will. And they're getting those out of the way. So there's all kinds of different ways and reasons that you can manage a forest. It's not just for the sale of timber, but again, that can always be part of it. So easements and forestry. So here's how it kind of works. And the language in the easements about two pages that deals with forestry. For landowners with forestry, reservations in their easement. So you have to, this is something we have to ask for. You put it in the easement, you say, and when we walk you through the easement process, we say, do you want to timber? Do you not want to timber? If you do want to timber, then there's certain parameters that have to be met. You need to develop a long-term forest management plan. We want to make sure that this plan is developed by a professional forester, a consulting forester, or somebody from a division of forestry somebody certified through American Tree Farm System. There's plenty of folks out there that can do these plans for you, but we want a long-term plan in place so that there's a long-term direction of where this forest is going and what we're heading towards. Also required is a timber harvest plan. This is the cut plan. When the cut is going to happen, we want to make sure we understand where, what the cut's going to look like, where the log landing area is going to be, where are the skid road's going to be, how are we crossing the stream, how are things going to be cleaned up when everything's done, ruts are fixed, sawdust piles are knocked down, whatever it may be. The timber harvest plan is that plan that comes together when it's time to cut. And that happens every 15, 20, 30 years, whenever your cycle is. But that's different from that long-term forest management plan, which is really looking at the 50-year progression of the forest. All the plans are designed to utilize the best available forestry BMPs. What's interesting about what we've done with our easements is we've not included those BMPs specifically in the easement itself. What we've done is pointed to professional foresters to develop plans that meet the ever-changing science of forestry. Things that were happening 20 years ago are not the best BMPs now, and we assume that 20 years from now, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, there's going to be different science out there, different BMPs that are in place, different ways to manage forests. So we're really pointing the easement at a living document, which is that forest management plan, which the professional forester at the time is developing, and tweaking, and updating with whatever the best science is that's available. So they can change. The goals can change. Things can change with that management plan. It's not set in stone what can and can't happen in the easement. And that, again, is by design so that the landowner has as much flexibility as possible to manage their forest in the way that they want to. And they have the ability to pivot if they need to in the next generation if things change. And we know things change. And at the end of the day, these plans are designed to maximize the sustainability of the woodland, the natural resources that are on the property, but also to help promote and protect the landowner to benefit them in terms of profitability of the forest. There are a lot of ways, and we've all seen bad timber jobs. And the idea here is to make sure that we've got enough consultants involved and enough forest managers involved that the landowner is getting not only the best plan, the best cut plan together, but also the highest value of their woods. Easements and the goals of this, again, fulfill the number one goal here is to fill the goals of the forestry management plan, and that's an ever-changing plan. We want to see a good cut. We want to focus on a plan that focuses on single tree and small group removal. This isn't just the idea of cut everything over 18 inches. That's not what we're looking for. A good forest management plan is going into the woods, tree by tree, marking trees and saying this one, not this one, or this group, not this group. And there's rationale behind that and an understanding of why those are being done. What we want to do is eliminate diameter limit cutting, overcutting, high grading, clear cutting when unnecessary, although clear cuts in some instances are necessary. So that's not a total can't have clear cuts. It's just, if we're going to have a clear cut, why is it important, and demonstrate that to us. That's really the plan between the consulting forester and the landowner. So we also want to strategically locate log landing areas, skid roads, stream crossings. We're trying to avoid any sensitive areas on the property when the cut happens. It's never pretty, we get that, but there's things that can be done to avoid permanent damage to sensitive soils, compacting things, ruts that are made that can be fixed on the way out, knocking down sawdust piles. All these things are things that can be done to make sure that a good cut happens. And again, we're trying to set in motion another quality cut in the future. That is really what we're trying to do, is not only protect the property, but also the landowner's financial interest in the property so that their great-grandchildren can do a cut and pay for their great-great-grandchildren's college. That's what we want to do. We want this to be a sustainable crop for landowners. So a few final things to consider. Landowners have full control over the type of cut and its timing. And I've talked about this, and I just want to stress that point. We are not here to weigh in on what you're cutting and when you're cutting it. We just want to make sure that there's a plan in place. We don't get any proceeds from the cut. That all goes to the landowner, just like we don't get any proceeds from any oil and gas royalties We don't get any proceeds from the cut. We just want to make sure it's done correctly and in some sort of sustainable way. Taxes on the sale of the timber can be sheltered by correctly timing the sale with the implementation of a conservation easement. So the year that you sell a bunch of timber, you're going to make a bunch of money. It may bump you up a tax bracket or two. If you time that correctly with a conservation easement, that easement can help you shelter the sale of that timber. Also, we can put together a good plan for you and everything else, but you can literally save sometimes tens of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes that you would have paid otherwise because you time these things together correctly. Western Reserve Land Conservancy stewardship staff is always available to assist in the development of a management plan, to answer any questions that are out there, to help monitor the cut when it's happening. I know that there's soil and water districts, and there are Division of Forestry folks that are out there helping monitor these cuts. We can be there as well if we have an interest in the property. We want to make sure things are done correctly, and just be another set of eyes and ears on the ground when the cut is happening. And last, again, but not least, the ultimate goal of this easement is to ensure a good cut and that the future cuts are profitable. So I talked a little bit about conservation easements. I talked a little bit about forestry, how those things blend together. If you have a question about easements, if you want to talk about your easement options, give me a call. I'd be more than happy to come out and meet with you, talk about what property you have, what your easement options are, what you can and can't do, all the process that goes into that. This is something that I'm getting a lot of calls on now. It feels like everybody's got a New Year's resolution in January to, this is the year that I'm going to protect my property. So I get 3 or 4 or 5 calls a week now, and I'm setting up meetings with landowners now to figure out what are their best options. Does an easement work for them? Maybe it doesn't work for them. We don't want to get into an easement with somebody that isn't right for them. And sometimes it's immediately perfect and we can get this done in 2 or 3 months. Other times they hear what we have to say, they think about it for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and then they call us back and it goes. We're here to help. We're here to be an option for you on the table. And again, one of the things that's most important as you work through all these processes with estate planning is to make sure that you've thought about easements, make sure you thought about your estate plan in general ahead of time so that you're not passing this burden on to your children. It is one of the worst things that you can do is not have these things taken care of ahead of time. So if nothing else, just do the estate plan. So that's all I have. I will transition it back to Suzanne. And I think we probably have a question and answer session at the end of all this. Is that correct?
Yes. And we did have one question. It pertained to, what if I felt that the Museum of Natural History should control the preservation of my bicentennial farm in Woodlands? And answered, and you can help me out on that. It's definitely one of the players on the table, as well as Western Reserve, and there's a few other easement holders out there. Did you want to add anything more to that?
Nope, that's the exact answer. If you feel more comfortable with the museum than us, or with the Soil and Water District, or with the state of Ohio, totally fine. That's perfect. We're just here to make sure that everybody has that option. And if somebody else does it, that's great. We don't get any commission or anything off of this. It's really something that we take on. When we do an easement, when we hold an easement, we have a perpetual obligation forever to defend that easement. And if we have to, we will use our attorneys and our legal defense fund to do that. So, but again, it's really about the comfort level you have with whatever organization you're working with. If you're going to do it with the Museum of Natural History, they're fantastic. That's great. It's one property that got protected that we don't have to work on. We're tickled that it got protected. So thank you.
The key is to avoid those accidental Walmarts going up, right?
Yeah, just accidentally put a Walmart back there. Is that a problem? That we don't want to see that happen.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, Brett. And, we partner with Western Reserve often. We co-hold easements with them, and we work on several other projects with them. They are great partners to have. So always good to hear from you, Brett.
Thank you very much for the endorsement. We appreciate that.
And lastly, tonight we have John Keene from the Division of Forestry, who is going to kind of wrap it up and talk about what a good cut or a bad cut can mean to your property. And I'm going to manage his slideshow. So let's see if I can pull that up. All right. All right, John, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you well.
Okay. Well, greetings, everybody. I wanted to thank David and Brett for chiming in with their programs up here in the Northeast. This is a unique partnership that the Division of Forestry has with Soil and Water, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, Farm Bureau, and other partners, at times the auditors' offices, consulting foresters, and we work together to put these workshops on. It has taken on a life of its own. The partners are extremely helpful in getting the word out about what's going on in forestry in this region and trying to help educate landowners. Our goal is to educate landowners so that they do not make economic mistakes, and so that they can manage their woodlands well and don't damage their resource. So we're all kind of working together to educate landowners, to protect landowners. So, okay, Suzanne, go with the next one.
Okay.
Okay, so most of the land, the forest land in the state is privately owned. And I work for the Division of Forestry as a Northern Service Forestry Coordinator. I work on private lands, again, educating landowners. Private lands makes up a very large percentage of the state forest land. Unfortunately, it's not a large percentage. The private lands program within ODNR is not a high percentage of the budget within ODNR. ODNR does own approximately 240,000 acres of state forest land. Much of our budget goes to the maintenance of that land. I will say that the 4 counties in the extreme northeast section of Ohio have roughly 650,000 acres of forest land in private hands. So more than all of the lands that ODNR own are in private hands in Northeast Ohio. So, okay. One of the things a lot of people don't realize is the size of the timber industry in Ohio. We do have more acres of trees in woodland than corn and soybeans combined. It is a $27.4 billion annual economic impact. Now, you see that the parks, recreation, fishing, hunting amounts to about $9 billion. Now, the 27.4 billion is a figure that came from OSU. It's a study they've done for years. We're looking for a new one to see what that number is. But just to compare that to some other things, the equine industry is advertises in the Farm Bureau publication, Our Ohio, and they take out a full page ad pretty often, and they tout that their business is I believe it's $2.8 billion annual economic impact for the equine industry, which is great. But I just wanted to use that as a comparative number with forestry. And we grow some of the best hardwoods and the best wood products in the world in this region of the country. You know, when you run further north into Michigan, Wisconsin, and Canada, you're looking at tree species that are used much more for paper production. They don't have to be high quality. So they're chipped into and pulped into paper fiber. And as you go to the west, in the Northwest, much of that, the species there are used for structural lumber. In the southern part of the country, southern yellow pine plantations go into treated lumber. The region we have is just some of the best stuff. It's highly sought after all over the world. Our forest products industry here in Ohio is, we are the largest producer of high grade furniture in the country. So that's just a little bit of background on how large the industry is. Okay, Suzanne. Now, as far as managing your property for the long term, David mentioned that defining goals is a big thing, and it is for landowners. Many landowners, they have some goals and objectives in mind as to what they want to see. They're not sure how to get there. I will say this isn't a terribly difficult thing to understand with just a little bit of assistance. What I would say that a landowner needs to do in anything from tree planting through harvesting, all you need to know how to do is express what you want to see happen on the property to your forester. They should be able to tell you how to get from A to B, whether you're planting a field to trees and reforesting, or whether you're trying to create diverse wildlife habitat, or need some income for certain things, or doing salvage sales because of storm events. They should be able to assist you in all those things and help you formulate your goals. Obtaining a woodland management plan is a key start to doing that. It gives you a document that explains to you what you own, what condition it's in, what can be done to improve each stand for whatever it is you want to improve it for. And doing the work is something that, the interesting thing about forestry work is, outside of invasive species control, many of the practices that you do in forestry last for a long time. It's not that if you do a thinning once and do it well, you generally don't have to do another thinning for 15 years. It does not have nearly the inputs of the traditional farmer, where you've got all your inputs and your harvesting and all your planning and all that kind of stuff. It's, if you do the practices, they last for quite a long time. Okay, go ahead to the next one, please. So as far as goals are concerned, what the list you see there is what most people come to us about. They want to diversify wildlife habitat. They want certain species on their property. Some want timber production. Most don't think about it until we look at their property and discuss what their options are. Recreation, aesthetics, the investment. Maple syrup is a big thing here in the Northeast. And, you know, this product and this resource up here, it's very much mismanaged. I will say that we have some of the worst harvesting practices in the state are going on up here in the Northeast because landowners are not doing their homework. It's just as simple as that. They need to talk to foresters before they make decisions, before they sign contracts, and they're not doing it. Portable mills are common up here in the Northeast, but that's the only place in the state that they're common. So it's not something I recommend at all. Most of those operations are cutting timber prematurely before it gets into the valuable size classes, and it's just it's a mistake. Okay, Suzanne. So some typical management activities. Again, this is not rocket science. Working in a woodland, boundary marking is a self-protection issue. It helps if there is timber trespass, which is occurring more and more often. Trail establishment, that can be done at either prior to, or it can be a goal of a timber sale if you're in need of a timber sale. Cutting grapevines, control of non-native invasive plants. Now that's a big deal, and that is one of the things that is a difficult thing to maintain. Invasive species in the woods are like weeds in a gravel driveway. They keep coming back. And that's just the way it is. Once you get control of them, you have to do some annual treatment. Some of you probably heard of crop tree release. It's a fancy term for thinning. Call tree control is the same thing. It's thinning. I often tell people it's, one of the technical forestry terms is junk. So we're gonna get rid of the junk. And so thinning actually can increase the rate of growth. It can quadruple the rate of diameter growth in trees if they're thinned at the right time. So your board footage production of lumber can go up significantly if a woods is properly thinned. Plus it allows sunlight to get to the forest floor and you get a level of vegetation that you won't have in a heavily canopied woods. Tree planting is done not terribly often up in this region, but it is done in the case often where a farmer does not want to plant or does not want to continue cropping, and they can switch their crop to trees. Timber harvesting, that is one of the biggest things that can impact a woodland negatively, and you really need to get the guidance of a forester before you make a decision to harvest timber. And I'll go into that on the next slide. Okay, we at the Division of Forestry, one of the big programs I promote is the Call Before You Cut program. It's basically a guideline to selling timber. It is something that it's a very efficient visit for us to do. When a landowner calls and says, hey, I've got somebody knocking at my door, or I've gotten a card in the mail, I need some money, what have you. I've got some timber, I'm thinking about selling it. That is when landowners are at their most vulnerable point. And I make it a priority to schedule those people and get out to those properties. I'll give you a quick example. I have to apologize. My computer is going to automatically shut down in 14 minutes. So the Call Before You Cut program, we want trees chosen and marked by a forester. The board footage inventory is compiled. That set of trees is going to be bid. You will bid, your forester will have buyers bid on that select set of trees. An example of this recently, I had a landowner call me, and I don't believe I was out on that property for more than 2 hours. They followed all my directions, and they ended up doing a timber sale, getting in a tax reduction program, which they knew nothing about, exploring the opportunities of getting in a cost share program called EQIP. And also they had a sale done. The bid ranges, they got multiple bids on this particular sale. The bid ranges for this set of trees ranged from 40,000 to 88.5, which was significant, obviously. So there is a process to selling timber. And again, you select a buyer, the contract signing and collect payment, that's all done by the forester. Your consulting forester is to help you through that. Okay, Suzanne. All right, I always talk about the 3 rules that I teach landowners. One is to never let a buyer decide which trees to cut. I know some of them get upset with me for preaching that, but that is the forester's job. He is the one that is to choose which trees to cut, and he does that based on your goals for selling some timber. And never sign a contract presented by a buyer. That is I see a lot of bad contracts floating around. There are a lot of buyers in the region that don't own a chainsaw, don't have a crew. All they have is a contract and a slick tongue. So don't fall for that. And I would never sell it directly to one individual unless you talk to a forester to do that. Occasionally, that is something that needs done if you have a really small sale, it's very easy to see which trees, where you know which trees to come out, but typically that is something we don't like to do. I like to get a set of trees marked by a consulting forester, have that set of trees put up for bid, and let people, let buyers, good buyers, foresters will limit who gets to buy to the good crews and let them competitively bid on that set of trees. Okay, Suzanne. All right. Doing a timber sale the right way. Typically, tree selection is a very, it's not that difficult. You want to take out trees that are either getting, they're going to be lower in value by the next time you have a sale, which is, 15 to 30 years, depending on the degree of the cut and the condition of the woodland. But a forester is trying to improve the overall growth and health and vigor of the woods by selecting the worst trees first. By the second sale, you should be working with a lot better stock. And that's just the idea. Access trails are something we really shoot to have. We like to have them, and conducting a timber sale can get those for us. People decide to sell timber for a wide variety of reasons. As I believe Brett said, a lot of people, or David said, hunting is a big deal. And many people want to do habitat enhancement type cuts, and timber sales are the tool you need to do that. Now, you noticed in some of Brett's last slides, the large trees. Often we will leave large landmark trees and like that, just because they're good aesthetically and people like them. Okay, next one. Okay, this is just a little illustration of it's an old picture. Just an interesting little thing to see. And the last one we have. Yeah, things didn't go quite well there. I do have to say I'm going to have to close off of here shortly. So if we have some questions, Suzanne, can you help me through this? Because I've got a machine that's automatically shutting down on me in a few minutes.
Geez, I didn't have to tell you to cut your presentation short or anything. That's perfect.
No, that I tell you, that came on and it just threw me for a loop. I thought, oh boy.
I don't see any questions right now, folks. If you have any questions to wrap up, please put them in the chat. Gail has included the program survey and evaluation link in the chat. If you could download that, we will also be sending it out later on. So I'll wait a few moments. All right, looks pretty good.
Can I ask a question orally? Because I can't see our chat room.
Sure, go ahead.
Rodstrom mentioned something about BMPs in his talk, and I don't know what that is.
That is a best management practice.
Ah,
So it
thank you.
depends on exactly what you're talking about, which would, in forestry, there's best management practices. There are also, water and land management, things like that. But that's what BMP stands for.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome. Oh, do state forest credits and CAUV effectively conserve and manage forest lands?
I assume that's can you ask that question again?
Yep. Do state forest credits and CAUV effectively conserve and manage forest lands?
They are designed to. Those two programs, I believe they're talking about Ohio Forest Tax Law and the current agricultural use valuation. Those are two programs that we assist with quite substantially. They are designed as an incentive to produce an agricultural product. Timber is an agricultural product. And, you know, landowners in those programs are supposed to follow their forest management plan. If it's a well-written plan, yes, they are designed to help do things correctly in the woodland. I hope that answers their question.
All right, anything else? All right, well, thank you so much, David, Brett, and John, and thank you all for coming and listening, and I hope you got a lot out of this. February 9th is our next presentation, and I think I have the flyer here that I will share. So right here, Woodland Management's Tips That Pay, February 9th, same time. You can register on Eventbrite and we will send you the link. All right, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording and have a great night.